Hi everyone, this is Matthew. I just wanted to give you a brief overview of the budget proposal that you're receiving in this email. Let's just get into it. The very first thing that you should note, and really the main topic for consideration, is our committed giving. As you can see, our committed giving for 2023 is 35% less than it was in 2022. And we were already running a pretty tight budget in 2022, so it means we're going to have to make some tough decisions for this current year. We basically have two options when we have less income coming in than our projected expenses. We can either cut our expenses or we can run a deficit. We'll consider each of them here in a moment. So just looking at cutting expenses, this over here is our projected income, our committed giving, and then over here in the right is our expenses, and this is for our current proposed budget, but it's very similar to last year, so with a few small changes as we'll get into later. The big blue column is our staff expense, and then the red part is building, then operations, community life, outreach, and then finally a little tiny bit of leadership development. So you can see, even if we got rid of everything except for staff, our committed giving for next year still wouldn't be enough to even cut or cover our staffing without significantly cutting Adam's hours or his compensation in some way, shape, or form. So that is one of the many reasons why we're not currently proposing to go this route. Let's consider instead running a deficit. Well, if you remember back to about a year ago when we were adopting this new proposal for savings and surplus, one cool thing is up here under number 1 it says we are going to set aside a reserve fund which will be 50% of the current annual budget. So that tells us each year how much we for sure need to set aside, and everything else goes into our budget shortfall fund. But then if we still have some in that budget shortfall fund, if you look down at number 4, it says at the end of the fiscal year, if there is a budget shortfall, funds will be used from the one-time grant fund to replenish the budget shortfall fund. So if we run a deficit, we eat into those savings, but those savings get replenished with the one-time grant fund. And this is just a little graph of how that would look in our current scenario. So this is currently the amount of net assets we have. Everything minus a few things we have set aside as debt. So then, given our current proposed budget, 50% that we'd set aside is in our reserve fund balance would be $28,000, and then the balance that we have, which would be the one-time grant fund going into 2023, would be approximately $48,000. Now, we haven't finished the end of this year, but that's a good number to start with. If we run our expected 19,000 and change deficit, then this is what it would look like at the end of 2023. You can see our reserve fund would still be full, and our one-time grant fund would still be sitting flush with $29,000. If we were to run the same exact budget the next year and maintain that lowered giving, we would still have a full reserve fund, and our one-time grant fund would drop by the amount of the deficit. By the end of 2025, or 3 years from now, we would have actually had to, our one-time grant fund would be replenished completely, and we would be dipping into our reserve fund. And it wouldn't be until the end of 2026 that our reserve fund would be totally gone. So that just tells us that thanks to the systems we have in place, it's not like instant Armageddon if we choose to run a deficit even as large as 19,000. It would slowly eat into these reserves. Now granted, we could still choose to grant some of these one-time grant funds in the next 2 years, and that might change the trajectory, but all of those things are taken into consideration when we're giving out those grants, for example. So I should also say too that this is assuming that we are maintaining 2023 giving. So I want to take you up here to this graph. This is our committing giving for the last 6 years, and plus next year. You can see it goes up and down, and we have a little pandemic spike, a little increase, and then a big drop here. And one thing we talked about in our finance team meeting when we were coming up with this budget proposal is what really is the trend. Like, do you draw the trend line this way? And do you read this as a dire problem? Or do you treat this more as an anomaly? And actually the trend line is something like this. It's really kind of hard to tell, and you almost need another value here for the next year to see what happens. If we maintain the lowered giving, if we increase again, if we go lower still. But the fact that we have this situation at the end of 2023, even running a deficit, leads the finance team with the support of the leadership team to say, we feel good about maintaining business as usual, operating at a deficit for 2023, and seeing what the next data point holds over here before we start reacting more conservatively. So let's look at the actual budget and what makes up that deficit that we're talking about. I'm going to have to figure out how to navigate. There we go. Oh dear. Pardon me. So there we go. Looking at the actual budget here. Okay, this is what I wanted to see. So looking at the budget, I won't get into all the nitty-gritty, but I just wanted to highlight a few of the things in green and orange. From our key here, green is new or increased spending, and the orange is decreased spending or an area where we just want to raise attention for some reason. The main green things I want to highlight are small cost of living raise consistent with previous years for Adam, and then maintaining the 403B match at a 4%. So if his base salary increases, that also means that he'll get a small increase in his 403B matching, presuming that he makes those elections. Just a note about this, we talked about this as a finance team, and we just mainly wanted to acknowledge that inflation has gone up a lot more than 3%. In previous years, we have given a 3% just cost of living raise, but we also recognize that we're running a deficit budget. So we felt that 3% increase was somewhat of a compromise, and we felt it was important. We also increased the cost of babysitting. The math is here. It basically just recognizes we need more than just 2 babysitters now if we want to have meetings that we value having. And then I also, this was totally me, everyone can push back against this, but I've noticed that this budget item for the leadership team retreat, $50 doesn't really do a bunch. So I was just plugging a little bit more so that we can buy a meal or something. Welcome to be pushed back. So the orange, one of the big things here was the Central Plains contribution. This is something we've been giving $24,000 over the course of the year for the previous 4 or 5 years or so. And I believe that was a recommendation from the conference, just based on our congregation size and other factors. But in this situation, we didn't really know how to adjust that, and so we're recommending maybe a middle ground of decreasing that, since that seems like something that was a larger budget item that we could decrease to absorb some of the deficit. That could be something for further conversation, or maybe it's not something that people care very much about. I do have an email. I sent an email to the conference minister just to get his input, and I will attach that into the body of my email. Some of the other things we're cutting, guest speakers, we're basically just saying we'll limit the budget to 1 speaker per year, but it's not saying that we can only have 1 person speak a year. It's just saying that more than one, we just have that be a one-time grant request from that fund. And kind of the same idea here with the community outreach and service. If we temporarily, for this year at least, take this down to 0, we can still make these sorts of things happen just through the one-time grant fund process. So hopefully that money is still accessible, just in a different way. And this would allow us to maintain our current missionary support levels, with the note that we'll let the families that we're currently supporting know that we have this decrease in giving, and so this amount might not be sustainable in future years. Those are the main things that we're looking at. I certainly welcome you to read this all in much greater detail, note any questions or comments you have, and we'll have time to talk about them at the big meeting. Thank you very much for your time looking through this with me, and hope to see you next week. Have a good night. Bye.